Hello, this is the Tennessee Government, Section B, Tennessee Judicial System lecture. Our prioritized standard is Government Civics 56, and objectively, we're going to examine the courts that make up the Tennessee judicial system. The courts of limited jurisdiction are the fourth level of courts in Tennessee that hear only certain civil and criminal cases. If you don't know what a civil case is, that is a case involving money. A criminal case means the possibility to serve jail time. That's the main difference between those two types of cases. The courts of limited jurisdiction are local trial courts that have judges chosen by popular election with three types of courts. The first type of those courts is the courts of general sessions. And the courts of general sessions are trial courts that handle preliminary matters in major criminal cases and have jurisdiction to try minor civil and criminal matters. So this is like a pre-court before you get into the jury witnesses part of it. This is where you go locally to your Court of General Sessions in Kingston. Also, still at this location, you'll have juvenile courts, which are trial courts for criminal or civil cases committed by juveniles, which is shocking based on the name. But again, they have this location in Kingston. And we also have municipal courts, which are trial courts, sometimes called city court, that deal with cases involving violations of city ordinances. So things like parking tickets, traffic violations, generally speaking, fines up to $50, jail sentences up to 30 days can be heard in a municipal court. So if you get a ticket from the Oliver Springs Police Department, this is where you would actually have to go to court. The courts of limited jurisdiction are funded by the local counties or the municipalities that they serve. But above those courts of limited jurisdiction are the trial courts of general jurisdiction. And these are the third level of courts in Tennessee that hear civil and criminal cases. The trial courts of general jurisdiction are going to be the state's trial courts that have judges chosen by popular election within their judicial districts. These courts generally have juries and allow for witnesses. So when you think of a court, you usually think of the judge, the jury, the witnesses, and then that defendant having the opportunity to confront those accusing them in court and bring their own witnesses in court. When you think of court, you're actually thinking of the trial courts of general jurisdiction. This is the level that you're actually familiar with. So this is, generally speaking, the starting point for many cases in the state, even though there is a level that is below this. This is usually the starting point for most people. The trial courts of general jurisdiction have four types of courts, and they're going to be meeting in Kingston again. First of these, the circuit courts, which are trial courts that hear both civil and criminal cases and hear appeals from the courts of limited jurisdiction. Also, they have chancery courts. Chancery courts, this is an exclusively civil trial court, meaning never a criminal charge, concerned with equity rather than law, dealing with things like divorces, adoptions, name changes, and contract disputes. So if you want to adopt somebody, or if you are adopted and you want to change your name, Chancery Court's the place you're going to have to go. Again, Kingston Courthouse is where you would actually go to do that locally. Criminal courts. These are trial courts established by the General Assembly in areas with heavy caseloads to hear criminal cases and also hear misdemeanor appeals from lower courts. Again, Kingston is where you would go if you had to go to criminal court. And also probate courts, which are trial courts that have jurisdiction over things like wills, estates, and guardianships. These usually deal with large financial estates. And again, locally, you go to Kingston if you had to go to probate court. Intermediate appellate courts are actually going to be the second level of courts in Tennessee, so even higher than the trial courts of general jurisdiction, that hear civil and criminal cases that are appealed from the trial courts. So locally, this represents the different appellate court districts. There are 3 primary districts in the whole state. There are 2 intermediate appellate courts, which are both composed of 12 judges that are nominated by the governor and then retained by a yes-no vote for 8-year terms. Now, when we talk about the intermediate appellate courts, I should point out, at this level, you have no juries. You have no witnesses. Generally speaking, you have multiple judges that will hear a case, though. First of those are the Court of Appeals. These hear most appeals of civil cases from the lower courts. So again, these deal with just civil cases. And then we also have the Court of Criminal Appeals. So these hear most appeals of criminal cases, both felony and misdemeanor criminal cases that are come from the lower courts. So again, if it's not a criminal charge, it would be just the Tennessee Court of Appeals that might hear that appeal. If it is a criminal charge, then it would be the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals to hear that charge. These courts serve as the last step in the appeals process before cases reach the Tennessee Supreme Court. Speaking of, the Tennessee Supreme Court is the highest level of courts in Tennessee, which is made up of 5 justices that are appointed by the governor after being nominated by what's called the Judicial Nominating Commission, and then retained by a yes-no vote for 8-year terms. Not more than 2 judges are actually allowed to live in any of the state's grand divisions, meaning you can only have 2 from East Tennessee, only 2 from West Tennessee, only 2 from Middle Tennessee. Can't have any more than that. The Tennessee Supreme Court is made up of 5 justices, with Jeffrey Bivens, the fellow in the middle there, serving as the Chief Justice. Again, at this level, they have no juries, they have no witnesses. It's just these 5 people that decide. The majority of the cases they hear are criminal and civil cases that are appealed from lower courts. Now, the next part makes them very different than the U.S. Supreme Court, where you go to the U.S. Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. Tennessee Supreme Court, they actually meet alternatively in Knoxville, Nashville, and Jackson to hear appeals to criminal and civil cases from each of those areas. So instead of you going to them, in a sense, they kind of go to you. So if you appeal to the Tennessee Supreme Court, you don't actually have to go to Nashville. You would actually go to Knoxville. That's the closest locality to you, and they actually will come to you. While the Tennessee Supreme Court must grant judicial review for cases involving the death penalty, disciplinary actions against attorneys, and tenure of teachers, they can otherwise decide what cases they actually want to hear. Cases where the principal question might involve the constitutionality of a state statute or in need of a speedy decision may actually bypass the intermediate appellate courts, go directly to the Tennessee Supreme Court, but that's very few of those. Tennessee Supreme Court, they can declare a state law unconstitutional if it violates either the U.S. Constitution or the Tennessee Constitution. Cases decided by the Tennessee Supreme Court can actually be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court if involving federal law. So there goes that one extra step, if it involves federal law. But if it does not involve federal law, the Tennessee Supreme Court actually has the final word on all questions that involve just state law with no federal component. All right, this concludes Tennessee Government, Section B, Tennessee Judicial System Lecture. We hit Prioritize Standard Government Civics 56, and objectively now you can examine the courts that make up the Tennessee judicial system.